Welcome back to Polymarket Insiders, folks. We are your real-time source for real-time coverage of the global information markets platform, Polymarkets. Polymarket, I should say. We are back in New York City today, where the mayoral nomination is still a jump ball and where the Board of Elections can't stop dropping the ball. Today, we've got one of the mayoral candidates who's been holding the board's feet to the fire and a super sharp Polymarket trader to help us figure out how to trade this thing going into the next data dump. Plus the Flash Cash Trivia Challenge coming at you in mere moments, so let's get right to it. We got loud again there. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Flip Pideaux. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't yet, do us a big favor and tap that little red subscribe button. It should be somewhere down there. And if you're with us live, please feel free to ask any questions you may have of me or the panel in the chat window. We'll try and answer as many live during the broadcast here as we can. And of course, if you're catching us on the replay, please feel free to connect with us on Twitter, where we are at Old Bull TV. Now, if you were with us on Wednesday, we brought you the story of a huge Polymarket windfall for a small group of traders, one of whom, Kieran, was on with us on that episode. Sort of broke down what the strategy was, what the play was, and how this group, in their careful and quite accurate, as it turned out, modeling, were able to predict that Garcia would close this double-digit gap to just a couple of points when the RCV tabulations came out. And of course, on that episode on Wednesday, this was in between the erroneous Board of Elections data dump on Tuesday and the corrected one on Wednesday, during which, between those two reports, of course, the Garcia price had slid way back. So this was another great opportunity to basically get in on the same trade because, as Kieran was explaining to us, the nature of the error of all this dummy data that was left in the original retabulation did not appear that it had certainly any appreciable, but probably any pro-Garcia bent to it. In other words, once that was stripped out, he was expecting that the new margin, this 2.2% gap between Adams and Garcia, would remain basically the same, if not even improve a little bit. And lo and behold, it wound up remaining exactly the same, 2.2% before and after pulling the dummy data out. So you got a nice little bump if, based on Kieran's analysis, you did then get back into Garcia. But, of course, this race is still very far from over. And if we can actually pull up real quick the Adams price on Polymarket to win the nomination, there it is. It's a little small there, but you can see I think it's 32 cents at the moment. So it's not a done deal. Garcia obviously does not have this in the bag. We're probably going to get another significant batch of data this coming Tuesday, which should, as long as the board doesn't run into any new computational or record-keeping problems, should include not only all of the early and election day voting, but all of the absentee and affidavit votes, or substantially all of them, and in any event, probably enough to give us a pretty solid read on who actually wins. But before we get to that stage, we want to do our best to try and help you set up for whatever that next report is going to bring us. So we need another pro trader, another sharp forecaster to help us handicap the race from here, and it's exactly what we have. He is well known to the Polymarket and Predicted communities. He goes by AE News. AE, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And the trading opportunities aren't the only things that are far from over. By all accounts, the BOE bungling continues apace as well. We've got one of the New York City mayoral candidates with us today, the one who was among the first to point out the BOE's major screw up earlier this week. And he thinks he's uncovered some remaining anomalies, some self-contradicting numbers in the corrected tally. So let's welcome Aaron Foldenauer, who's going to break this down because it's complicated, and this concern online, on Twitter, other online forums, has been getting dismissed by other observers, by the BOE itself, I think incorrectly. So we're going to step through the details, hopefully put some pressure on the BOE to reconcile, which in my opinion is necessary if we're to put have any remaining faith in their accounting and administration of this or any elections. So won't you please help me welcome Aaron Foldenauer. Aaron, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, Flip.
All right, gentlemen. And first, before we get into all this, I do want to get to our Flash Cash Trivia Challenge. It's once again time to win free stuff. All right, folks. The subject of our analysis and scoring today, of course, the New York City BOE is not only a hapless and gargantuan agency which slurps an incredible amount of tax revenue from New York City residents. Its budget is fully 10 times that of the city of Chicago. And it's actually, if you can believe this, more than twice the budget of the New York State Board of Elections. But for today's $50 in Trivia Flash Cash, what we need from you is how much federal funding the BOE is budgeted to receive this year in 2021. How many of your federal tax dollars are budgeted to go to the New York City Board of Elections? And we're going to need that to the nearest tenth of $1,000,000. And of course, you need to tweet that using the hashtag Polymarket Insiders. If you don't do that, then we're not going to be able to find your submission. The first person to get it right to the nearest tenth of $1,000,000 using that hashtag will win that cool $50. So while you work on that, let's get to our panel. And Aaron, we're going to start with you because I want to just, again, recap before we get into what you've been sort of whacking the BOE over anew in the last kind of 24 hours is to sort of recap the original problem for anyone who hasn't been following this or wasn't with us on Wednesday. Actually, you know what? You can probably do that better. So I alluded in the intro, this had to do with dummy data, and you were one of the first to actually quantify the size, which actually was a huge percentage of the votes they were reporting. But can you give us just a very quick synopsis? It's not the focus today, but just to bring people up to speed. What was the big error that caused them to retract their report earlier this week?
The synopsis is election night, the Board of Elections reported approximately 800,000 votes. And when they ran the first simulation on Tuesday, a few days ago, a week after the election, the Board of Elections told us all they were doing was taking those very same election night votes and then running the additional rounds of RCV simulations on top of that. Because on election night, we were only told first choice vote totals. So we got 799,000 votes on election night, and we were told first choice vote totals. A week later, we were told we were working with the same data set. And as soon as we got the RCV simulation, the initial one on Tuesday, I said, wait a second, why are there 941,000 votes here? Where did the additional records come from? It made no sense. And then further, placements of the candidates even before RCV simulations ran. So in other words, round one placements of the candidates changed dramatically. So I was a candidate in the race. I'm a non-establishment candidate. I'm also an election lawyer. And on election night, I came in 9th place, just after the 8 quote unquote leading candidates, each of whom raised millions of dollars. And fast forward a week later, when we got the first erroneous RCV simulation, all of a sudden I was in last place before RCV simulations even ran. It made absolutely no sense, given that it was the same exact data set, and there'd be no reason for positions to flip if you're starting with precisely the same data. So I crunched the numbers very quickly. I got it a detailed tweet and spreadsheet. You can see it on my Twitter account, Aaron Foldenauer, right now. And as I tweeted out this information, I was shouting out from the rooftops, calling journalists, emailing journalists, and I saw news anchors live on TV, and I could virtually see just egg on everyone's faces as they started reading the results. And I think the RCV simulations came out around 3:30, and I think by 5:30, some of the news anchors were saying, wait a second, Aaron Foldenauer was pointing out some weirdness with the data. And then by 6:45, the Board of Elections was forced to admit to a quote-unquote discrepancy. And then by about 11 p.m., the Board of Elections had scrubbed its website of this simulation and admitted to a mistake. So that was the first error that we saw, the first major bungle by the Board of Elections.
Perfect. Thank you for that recap. And so that kind of brings us to where we were as of yesterday, right? Yesterday being Thursday, one day after they re-released the corrected tally. And of course, people were looking at this with a bit more skepticism, healthily, after the first big screw up. And now we need to get into the real meat of this, because again, as I mentioned in the intro, there's been a lot of pushback on your critique of this, the corrected report. amazingly including the BOE, is sort of ratifying the critique. To me, it seems like it's totally wrong, but it's putting the cart before the horse a little bit. Tell us what you found funny with the corrected tally.
So here's what happened on the night of the first erroneous simulation. The Board of Elections, by 11 o'clock p.m. or so, they said, sorry, so sorry. We had 135,000 extra votes, extra records, to use their term, in the system. We're sorry about that. And they said tomorrow, which was Wednesday at the time, tomorrow we're going to try it again. And all we're going to do is we're going to release a new simulation that now removes that dummy data. So they told us there are 135,000 dummy records. And so we're working with the same data set. So you think 24 hours later, when the new data comes out, that we'd have 135,000 fewer votes in round one, because those are the extra records, right? So the results came, that the new corrected RCV simulation came out, and you see it on your screen here. The next day I crunched some numbers, and actually, just so you know, Flip, what I was trying to do initially was I wanted to see who they allocated the dummy votes to. And it was supposed to be sort of a fun tweet. How many dummy votes did they allocate to Eric Adams? How many dummy votes to Catherine Garcia? How many dummy votes did I get, Aaron Foldenauer? So that was my initial exercise. But then as I looked at the grand totals and I looked at the numbers, I said, wait a second. If you look at the comparison, there were only 122,000 fewer votes reported in the corrected RCV simulation compared to the initial RCV simulation. And I said, wait a second, there should be 135,000 fewer records. So why are there only 122,000 fewer records? There's any number of explanations as to what's going on here. Maybe the Board of Elections didn't delete all of the dummy records. Maybe some of the dummy records were blank. Maybe the Board of Elections dumped in some new ballots in addition to removing the dummy ballots, which they didn't tell us they were doing. But we haven't gotten an explanation. All they told us they were doing was removing the dummy ballots, right? So there's no explanation here. There's been some unclear sort of tweets going out, and whatever has been said wouldn't stand up in a court of law. And basically, at the end of the day, we're going to need a complete accounting from the board as to what's really going on here. Now, coincidentally or not, about an hour after I tweeted about this latest discrepancy yesterday, the Board of Elections then said, oh, we were supposed to release all of the ranked choice voting numbers for the down ballot races, the Queensborough president races and the city council races. But because of, quote, additional quality control measures, we're not going to release those results now. So again, yesterday, they were supposed to release all that city council RCV data because you have all these city council candidates who are waiting for their simulations. But now the Board of Elections has canceled that. So, right. And we don't even know if today the Board of Elections is going to release that down ballot data. So whatever schedule the Board of Elections on, it's getting pushed out. You know, we're supposed to, the board has told us that we're going to get sort of the absentee ballot RCV simulations on July 6th, or a new RCV simulation that includes absentee ballots, but God knows if that's going to happen at this point.
Right. And just to revisit again, because it's confusing, this second discrepancy, and people of good faith are getting confused about the supposed explanation for it, the supposed reconciliation, which is that, well, okay, we had 800,000 election day votes being reported on election day, but that didn't actually count. That was only 96 point something percent of the actual scanners reporting. So there's a few percent yet to report. And so, of course, a week later or 8 days later, you'd have a few more. We're now up to about 820,000. But that's not the calculation that you're looking at. The calculation you're looking at is June 30th, Thursday, Wednesday versus Tuesday. So Tuesday was already a week after election day. It already, per the board, would include all of the up through election day voting, even those that hadn't gotten captured, that remaining 3 point something percent. what you're
Bingo.
looking at is the 135,000 that they said was the dummy data set was stripped out from the 629 data. But from 629 to 630, it did not go down by 135 and went down by 122. So like you said, there's any number of explanations here. One, it could just be that when they said 135, that's just kind of close enough for government work. It was actually 122, and they're just very bad at measuring something that's kind of right in front of them. Possibly there are a lot of moving parts. They were panicking. Who knows? Maybe they were just very wrong in estimating the size, characterizing the size of the dummy data set. That's a possibility. It's also possible that even on 629, 1 week after the election, they still had not somehow managed to gather up all the scanner data and have all the election day data. They haven't said that either of those things is true. The Board of Elections' actual explanation about your flagging of this second discrepancy is that no, this is just from election day data that didn't get reported on election night. In other words, their explanation completely misunderstands their own reported numbers. In fact, we have the tweet here. It's the one the BOE's correct that the 12K discrepancy is uncounted election day votes. It's not this one. It's the other one.
That's their apology.
The BOE.
Where they mentioned the 135,000. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hang on one sec. Here we go. So Stephen Romaluski in replying to, I believe to you or someone who was in turn replying to you, said, no, the 12K is the difference between in-person votes counted as of last week, meaning on election day, and the new total of in-person votes, meaning fully realized a week later, the following Tuesday. Some people, he goes on to say, some people were saying the 12K was another mistake, but it's not, I believe. BOE has now counted all the in-person votes, and the total is 12K more than last week. The BOE underneath, you can see, then replied, that is correct. Yes, that is correct, exclamation point. That's not correct. There may be totally innocent and immaterial explanation here. Again, it could be that when they said 135, they really meant 122, and there weren't 135. They just sort of miscounted it when they were issuing this hurried mea culpa on Tuesday. It could be that there were additional lagging election day votes that had not been counted over the course of the week. But one way or another, it's not what they're saying here. We know for sure. Again, that doesn't mean ill intent. It could just mean they're hugely confused. But we obviously need to know which it is, especially after the magnitude of the screw up a week ago. To have 140,000, 20% more votes of literally fake data, fake votes, to then need third parties, yourself included, and some traders on Polymarket predicted elsewhere also flagging this because they were very curious about the results. If the board has its head not screwed on to that embarrassing degree, clearly they need to give some kind of an accurate or at least plausible accounting of this 12,000 vote differential, especially for a race that may come down to be very, very close. And if the data is messed up in the citywide races, it could be just as messed up in the council districts and other sub-citywide races. So it obviously could make the difference there. Again, it's not to say that the data they have right now is incorrect, but their accounting for the discrepancy is definitely incorrect, and it definitely has to be corrected for people to have any faith in the outcome of this election. I'll give it back to you, Aaron. But that's why I wanted to have you on and today and really go through this explicitly, because one way or another, the board is wrong here about its own interpretation of its own error.
Agreed with your analysis, Flip. And there are, and we may talk about this later, 3 pending lawsuits filed by 3 of the other candidates at this point. And I'm a party to those suits as a candidate. And I'm going to be pressing this issue in court. So if the board doesn't voluntarily sort of fess up to what they've done and provide complete transparency, then that's gonna it's gonna come out in court in the weeks ahead. And the other concerning thing is that the thing about ranked choice voting, it's a little bit of a black box as far as how these algorithms run. Now, we all kind of understand, at least on a high level, what's supposed to be happening in round by round eliminations. Now, here, the error was easy to catch. Your traders probably started asking questions, and I put together data within an hour and started calling journalists, many of whom have thanked me since then for preserving them of further embarrassment. And it was easy to catch because the data, the errors were in round 1. But what if there's an error between round 3 and round 4, or between round 8 and round 9? How would we ever catch that? So that's just another issue to flag, just to think about in the future, that might well come up in litigation at some point.
Yeah, very, very good point. All right, I want to shift gears a bit. We're going to come back to this, but I want to get to the actual markets here, because that's the crux of all of this analysis. And AE News, if you can start us off here. Obviously, the main market that we're looking at, there's several proxies for this, other ways to bet on the outcome here, but the main one that we're looking at is, will Eric Adams win the Democratic primary? And you can see there he is trading at 32 cents. So with this Tuesday horizon in mind, when we're likely to learn something significantly more, including for the first time information about how the absentee votes broke down, how are you thinking about this price, about what to expect in the absentees, and what's your recommendation for how traders, play this in this next round? Possibly not the last round, but this next major round, going to, it's 4 days from the next data dump.
Yeah. So at this point, who wins is really down to the absentee ballots and the affidavit ballots that will be in the next update. So if we look at the current margin, it's in the final round, it's 358,521 versus 343,766. Adams versus Garcia, and that's a net margin of 14,755. So that's the margin that Garcia has to overcome if she wants to win. And one interesting thing to note is from the Adams memo from the Adams team that was put out yesterday, they had a number for the preliminarily valid absentee ballots, which was 114,831 out of 125,396. So a small number of absentee ballots have still been coming in since that was posted. We're currently at 125,709. There should be another updated report today. So most likely we would expect something somewhere around 115.5K valid Dem absentee ballots, probably when it's all said and done. And then affidavit ballots, that could be anywhere from, say, 8 to 20. Generally, it's about 1% of the votes that are affidavits. So somewhere in the ballpark of 10 would be expected. So as far as turnout goes, we have 819.6K plus that 115.5K in Dem absentee. We also should account for curing. That most likely won't be too high. Let's say that's 2. Then if provisionals are, say, 13, that would put us right at 950K total. Maybe less than this if provisionals are lower. So if we put those assumptions, if we assume those, then we can see remaining ballots should be somewhere 130.5K. So the current exhaustion rates of ballots is 14.3%. If you look at the final round, round 9 of the RCB tabulations. So we don't know for certain what the exhaustion rate for the absentee ballots will be. I'm personally thinking it will be slightly lower, but that is up to speculation. If we assume, say, 12% exhaustion rate for absentee ballots, that would put us at about 12% on the absentee and provisionals. That would put us at about 112K votes, active votes that are coming in. So to overcome the current margin, we'd need to see essentially a 13.2% in favor of Garcia on those active ballots from that approximately 130K new votes in order for Garcia to win.
So that, if I can interrupt you for just a second, does that suggest that this is a higher haul of absentees than we expected? Because I thought I had seen that the required margin, Garcia margin, would be about 17%, based on expected number of absentees to come in. So is this preliminarily valid count higher than we'd expected, and therefore giving Garcia a little bit more comfort?
Yeah. Well, personally, the number I expected for the valid absentees was about 115K. So this was actually in line with what I personally expected. That was just an estimate, though. I thought rejection rate is probably somewhere between 5 to 15%. And this was pretty middle of the road there.
Okay, so if she needs 13%, then a 13% margin in the absentees, and she had, upon retabulation, a 2% deficit. This is kind of the crux of the investment case, the trading thesis at this point, right? Is, how much more favorable can we expect the absentees to be versus the early in election day voting? What's your read on that? How high, a bar is that 13% for her to clear?
Yeah, generally in these kinds of elections, you would expect the absentee ballots to favor a candidate like Garcia, right? You have more older voters, more white voters. How high a bar is it? It is pretty well in line with what other traders like Havoc or herein had suggested, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Garcia would have still been favored even if the deficit was maybe more around 3 to 4%. So this was basically maintaining the existing odds of 70 to 80% Garcia being favored.
Gotcha. So yeah, it seems as though, as these risks have sort of been de-risked one by one, not all of them yet, but we now know approximately how many absentees will come in. You've walked us through sort of a reasonable estimate of how many will be valid and not exhausted, so make their way through to the final round of retabulation. It seems as though the pro-Garcia case is being shored up little by little, and yet we've seen people start to back away a little bit in the markets, less so on Polymarket, and this is one thing I want to get your feedback on too, less so on Polymarket, more so on predicted, actually. I think on Poly, you've now got almost 70-30, or 68% for Garcia to Adams 32. On predicted, this is the who'll be elected mayor market, not the nominee, but obviously it's a pretty close proxy. They've got 62-38. So this is a slightly lesser disparity. They were trading at about a 10 percentage point spread between the predicted price and the Polymarket price. But that divergence, I think, just sort of appeared a day or two ago. So do you have a sense, I guess there's two questions here. One, why Garcia's price is softening, if anything, and two, why on the two different markets we're seeing not a huge, but a material divergence?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think part of the reason why Adams was surging a bit, especially on predicted, is because of the memo put out by Adams' team yesterday, by Matthew Ray from Team Adams. And of course, this memo was very pro-Adams, and the market responded to it accordingly. But Polymarket traders probably are a bit more careful with this information, and so weren't pumped as hard. And that's not to say the memo didn't have useful information, because the memo is very, very useful in that it gave us a number of the preliminarily valid absentee ballots.
Right.
And most of the analysis is fair, but there are a couple things that are incorrect or missing from the analysis. For one, the Adams team says that there's 18% exhausted ballot rate, which is not quite right. And they also don't mention provisional ballots at all, the affidavit ballots, that is.
Interesting. So you think whatever its flaws, it was this internal Adams campaign memo that may have softened things up on Garcia. In other words, it's not from that and what you were saying earlier. It doesn't sound like there's much of a counter argument. I mean, it's obviously not to say Garcia's a lock, but much of a counter argument to the Garcia case becoming, if anything, only stronger since the RCV data came out, right? I mean, are there any Are there any new kind of warts on this thesis that have emerged in the last day or two, other than the Adams memo, which sounds like it can be chalked up to kind of a morale booster / continue to contribute to me, so I'll have funds to fight this in court if I lose because I really should have won, kind of a message?
Yeah, I'd say Garcia odds maybe have even slightly increased just because we know that the absentee ballots, not many of them were rejected. It was about in line with what was expected, but it reduces uncertainty because some people thought maybe there could be over 10 or even as high as 15% rejection, which we are apparently not seeing. And another reason for the price difference may also be, or just that Garcia odds have not risen further, are that a lot of traders are de-risking. They had large positions at 30 cents, 40 cents, 50 cents, and they want to reduce their overall risk in the market.
Well, yeah, that's a good point too. We know there were hundreds of thousands of shares, that were bought on the cheap going into the RCV report. So that may be causing some of the softening as well. Aaron, let me come back to you on this. I know you're not actively involved in these markets, but obviously as someone who's totally inside the race, and as a candidate, as an election lawyer, as obviously a keen analytical observer of the numbers and the data here as they're coming out. What do you make of this kind of market consensus that while it's still very much a jump ball, that Garcia has something like a 2-to-1, if not a 3-to-1 edge over Adams?
I'm surprised because I don't hear political commentators making this prediction. I think political commentators overwhelmingly view Adams as the favorite, so I'm surprised. That's point one. And I also do want to comment on some specific points with respect to the absentee ballots that I haven't heard today and get your comments on it. The first thing is, remember, leading up to Election Day, Garcia got a tremendous amount of additional publicity when she was out campaigning with Andrew Yang. And I believe it was the weekend before Election Day when that really ramped up. Remember that most absentee ballots had probably already been placed in the mail at that point. So Garcia's absentee ballots would not benefit from that crazy boost of publicity that she had Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, right in advance of Election Day. So I do think you should take that into account. So that's point one. Point two, political machines are generally better at getting absentee ballots in the door. Who has the political machine here? Eric Adams. Eric Adams did extremely well in deep Brooklyn and deep Queens and also in the Bronx. So I expect Eric Adams and the machine to do very well in submitting Eric Adams favorable absentee ballots. Third of all, I could send you the image to put it on your screen if it's something that you can easily put up, because it's a little hard to read in reverse here, and I'm trying to center it on my screen. But if you look at assembly districts where absentee ballots were outstanding, basically of the 125 absentee ballots that were returned, 55,000 of those absentee ballots are from assembly districts that favored Eric Adams. Only 38,000 of the absentee ballots that were returned are from assembly districts that favored Catherine Garcia. So I'm not so sure that Catherine Garcia is going to win the absentee ballots at the margin required, whether it's 13%, 17%, or whatever the number is. And then the final thing, which is really an X factor, look at the penultimate elimination round here. Only 347 votes separate Maya Wiley from Catherine Garcia in that penultimate elimination round. So what if Maya Wiley picks up more than 300? Obviously, there's going to be, just for simplicity, let's say Maya Wiley picks up 348 twos, threes, fours, and fives over Catherine Garcia, and thus she knocks out Catherine Garcia in that penultimate elimination round. Then all of a sudden, it's between Maya Wiley and Eric Adams at that point, and it's a completely different game. So that's a real wild card on top of the few factors I already mentioned. And I'm happy to do a back and forth here with your data analysis and everything to talk about the political dynamics and otherwise here. That's
all very useful stuff. Let's start with that last point there, AE, because Wiley is being given no credit in the markets. I mean, if the sum of the Garcia winning and Adams winning probabilities are right at, if not over 100. So, but Aaron makes a good point that in that penultimate round, she's within a few hundred votes of making it to the final round with Adams. So why is it that there's no path here for Wiley? Or, I think even any path for second place, if you look at where we have the second place markets. So what is it about when we incorporate the absentees? Why things can't tip in our favor if the estimates are off a bit?
Right. It comes down to the demographics of the absentee voters, and it's expected that, say, older and white voters would prefer Garcia to Wiley. And that should be enough to prevent Wiley from becoming second place. And if, say, in a theoretical scenario where Wiley gets to second and Garcia is eliminated, her odds of beating Adams would be far, far lower because you wouldn't expect as many second, third, fourth rankings to go to her versus Garcia.
Right. Yeah, I said that latter part is easier for me to digest than the second place. You see here on your screen, she's trading at 5 cents to be second place. And as you say, the demographics have a clear expected bent to them, but it's hard to say anything with 95% probability. Let's get back to the other point that Aaron was making in terms of sort of the counterpoints to the expectations about whether she can get over that 13% bar and the timing of the Garcia-Yang partnership. I think the board has been putting out a daily tally of the absentees. Does the timing and sort of the relative aging of the different batches of absentees as they have come in, tell you anything about how many might have been pre Garcia-Yang blitz versus post, and whether if it's a lot, in other words, if a lot of them were mailed relatively early on before that partnership, if that means that fewer people are going to rank her more favorably because of the partnership, such that she would that, in other words, eat into the RCV bump, the retabulation bump, and if so, does that then mean she's got to get more than 13%? Because she's not going to have a double-digit catch-up in the retabulation process.
Yeah, if you look at the absentee ballot reports, it's about a quarter of them, I believe, give or take, rough estimate, that were sent in after the alliance started. I'd have to double check the reports for a more accurate number, but it's about a quarter.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think in sum total of Aaron's pushback on your analysis about the absentees? Are these risks that maybe throw a little more uncertainty around the 70-80% likelihood that Garcia pulls it out?
Yeah, I think that's part of the uncertainty here.
Mm-hmm. But you're still happy with that valuation? You think this is still a buy at 68? Sorry, 66 now.
Yeah. Yes, I'd say so.
Aaron, it sounds like you'd be going on the other side of this trade if you were putting in new money now.
I might be on the other side of the trade. Listen, Garcia did well in a few areas, right? Garcia did extremely well in person in Manhattan and really the ritzy parts of Brooklyn, let's say Park Slope, Prospect Park. And she did all right in Riverdale, sort of northern Bronx, and a little bit in Staten Island. But I see a lot more machine, the data just showed, a lot more machine absentee ballots coming in from Eric Adams' territory. And another thing to keep in mind is that there are most voters don't vote on policy like you might think. So if you say, okay, you see moderate voters, they don't necessarily vote for a moderate. Some voters will go up and down the line and vote for women. There are a lot of voters that tell me that I want a woman as the next mayor, so I'm going to rank the women. And there's some people who also vote by name, based on the ethnicity of the name, or even by race. So you have to keep that in mind. So there might be more people than you think who sort of might rank sort of Adams, Wiley, and there might be a lot of people who sort of rank Wiley, Garcia, or Garcia, Wiley. So I think there's an extra variables there that you need to take into account as to how voters will actually do their rankings, because of course we're not only worried about the first choice, but also the 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, where the first choice vote isn't available. Mm-hmm. And progressives did do a good job of coalescing around Maya Wiley in, say, the week in advance of the election, which really the odd thing about the whole election is that the election was kind of a referendum on Andrew Yang, and then Andrew Yang ends up finishing in a distant fourth after the progressives coalesced late around Maya Wiley. So I don't know. I think some of those late absentee ballots, they might break more for Wiley than for Garcia for reasons I'm articulating. Brad Lander in the controller's race, he was the progressive favorite. He got very little publicity. He had an AOC endorsement for a long time, but it didn't have much traction. Many political observers were thinking that he was going to get beaten by the city council speaker, Corey Johnson. But then, Brad Lander's looking pretty good at this point. And then in the DA's race, which is not ranked choice voting, you had Tally Faradian Weinstein, who was all over the airwaves and mailboxes, but then gets beaten out by Alvin Bragg, it appears, the progressive candidate. So I wouldn't really count out Maya Wiley at this point. I mean, at 5 cents, I'm not providing investment advice, but that's kind of an interesting number as well.
All right, I want to get to the post-election meltdown that we're inevitably going to encounter here, and Aaron, I want to come back to you in a second on that. But AE, as you have sort of poured through the reports that have come out thus far, and as we look forward to next Tuesday, how much confidence do you have? If we had a Polymarket market on whether we get what we're looking for next Tuesday, or whether the BOE, as they did with the other citywide races yesterday, simply says, you know what, we're not going to release anything else as for damage control, quality control, whatever they're calling it. Are you feeling pretty good that we'll know something materially more come Tuesday, or are you getting worried that this could stretch out farther and farther?
I am not betting on – I'm sorry, I don't know who that question was to, but I'll answer it quickly. I'm not betting on receiving results on the next RCV simulation on July 6th. The Board of Elections commissioners, they meet every Tuesday, and then last Tuesday
they're on vacation now too.
Yeah, they said, we might have a meeting notice, but there's going to be so many people out of the office. I'm not so sure that we're going to have a meeting Tuesday. So and the canvassing, I don't believe. So there are warehouses across the city now where absentee ballots are being opened, and observers can sit there and sort of look at each ballot as it's being opened and whatnot. That's not even supposed to occur, I believe, Sunday or Monday. So unless that finishes tomorrow, and I haven't heard any reports that that's going to finish tomorrow. I think there's some limited canvassing hours tomorrow, that I don't see how we could get a reliable RCV run with absentee ballots. There's on Tuesday, the 6th, which is right after the holiday weekend, and knowing how a lot of board elections workers still haven't been coming into the office. De Blasio famously announced some months ago that, city workers need to come back to the office, but it turns out it's only like one or 2 days a week right now. And with all of the quality control issues, we're delayed on down ballot races right now. Again, city council races are arguably as important, if not more important, than the mayoral race from a political perspective. They're clamoring for results more and more people on Twitter is saying the board should wait, shouldn't even release these preliminary total runs, RCV simulations, because of how wrong they've been and because they don't include all the ballots. And again, you include absentee ballots, and it could change eliminations in earlier rounds, which then affects later rounds. So for all those reasons, I'd bet against getting results on July 6th. Can I bet on that on the markets?
Maybe we can suggest it to the Polymarket crowd to add the market. But AE, let's assume Aaron is right and we don't get what we're looking for Tuesday. Is there any way to play the kind of chaos trade generally? I mean, there was this past week, right? Because we had that nicely timed episode on Wednesday in between the two reports, and the chaos trade there was simply, don't worry about the chaos. The chaos is real and major, and it's horrible. But it's not. It didn't really interrupt the pro Garcia case. In other words, if you liked the pro Garcia case the first time, which saw Garcia shoot way up, obviously when the first report came in, then from the backslide, just play it again and wait for the new one to come out, because it shouldn't affect the amount she pops in the RCV retabulations. So that was a great way to play it that time. But here, if the thesis is that we're unlikely to get meaningful data, and let's say people interpret that as, wow, it's really, really screwed up, they've got more data problems there, how can you play that? Is it the same? Basically, people ascribe the Garcia resurgence as, well, that was so unexpected, and the BOE completely screwing everything up was so unexpected, they must be related, right? The screw up must be the reason that Garcia is doing better than we would have thought a week and a half ago. Is that the trade that if you want to speculate on more foul ups at the board?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think there isn't that much left that they could mess up at this point. And
that's famous last words. We'll see about that.
Famous last words, yeah. They could always do something, yeah.
They only have $200 million budget to work with. Yeah,
I'd say any delay that they do have wouldn't really affect the odds. So if the price slips in one direction, either load up or see if there's a reason. Perhaps there was information that was leaked somewhere. Maybe we got a measure of, say, the provisional ballots that are available, for instance. So that is something to watch out for.
All right, now let's get into the real aftermath here. Once we do get all the data and it's cleaned up, or the BOE swears it's all clean and non-fake. Aaron, you were served with some paperwork just today that sort of hints at what's about to come. But what is about to come? What's the postseason like after this? After the results are in?
So we have the top three candidates each have filed a lawsuit to reserve their rights to litigate all of this in court. So that's of course Eric Adams, Catherine Garcia, and today Maya Wiley. And oftentimes these are boilerplate lawsuits. Today was the last day to file and serve such a lawsuit. So these are often boilerplate lawsuits. But here's the most interesting thing. Maya's lawsuit, which she apparently filed late last night. She had a press conference yesterday, and she was like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to file a lawsuit. But then later in the day, and I actually talked to her at that press conference yesterday, and she's like, oh, we'll make a decision soon. And then a few hours later, her lawyers file a suit. And the interesting thing about her suit is that she didn't file just a boilerplate lawsuit, but rather she specifically references in her suit the 347 vote margin in the penultimate elimination round. And she says in the suit that because of this margin, and it's of course if a slim margin is maintained as we get more simulations right down the road, that she wants a full manual recount. And we're talking a hand manual recount. So I don't know if either of you are old enough to remember Bush v. Gore, where we had hanging chads and everything. Of course, they're not chads here in New York City. We have bubbles. But basically, that's what you're looking at, a one-by-one count. And of course, and let me back up just to talk about the election law here for a second. And I'm not going to tell you, I don't even know what my legal position is going to be on this, but the election law says under the old system, where it was just first past the post, no ranked choice voting, under the old system, if you have a margin of less than 0.5%, 0.5%, if you have a margin of less than 0.5% separating the top two candidates, then there is an automatic manual hand recount. So that actually happened 2 years ago in the Queens DA race between Tiffany Caban and Melinda Katz. The margin was extremely close. I think it was hundreds of votes, but it didn't even have to be that close. And there was a full manual hand recount. And the turnout there was much lower because it was just the Queens DA race. There were no sort of higher ballot races that drew anyone out to the polls. And there was a full manual recount there, and it took weeks. And remember, that was just choose one, right? That was not ranked choice voting. Under ranked choice voting, if you do, I can tell you what a full manual hand recount looks, because this actually happened several months ago. Not a full manual recount, but a full manual count. The Board of Elections just recently, a few weeks ago, actually approved the software that actually runs the ranked choice voting algorithms. But ranked choice voting was legal in New York City as of January 1st. And you had a few special elections and a few city council races earlier this year where there was ranked choice voting, and the software wasn't approved, so they had to do a full manual count. So what you have to do a full manual ranked choice vote count is have a bucket for each candidate. And what you do is you separate the votes by the first choice votes for each candidate, and you place the first choice votes in the bucket corresponding with each candidate. And then once that's done, whichever bucket has the fewer number of votes, you take those votes out of that candidate's bucket and you figure out what the number twos were. And then you allocate those across the remaining buckets. And then, of course, that first candidate who was eliminated, that bucket is thrown away. And then you run the process again. Which candidate has the fewest number of votes in that bucket? And then you go to that candidate's votes, and then you say, okay, what were the twos or threes for that candidate that now we need to reallocate to the other remaining candidates? And then you sort those out into the remaining buckets. And then you throw out that second candidate who was eliminated, right? Imagine doing this for where you have what's the total now?
820,000 votes. Or yeah, it's going to be closer to 1 million with the absentees, right? 900 some thousand.
Right.
There's
So
going to be some big buckets.
Yes. So it's going to be chaos. Now, we were sold a bill of goods when we were told about this ranked choice voting system, that this will save money, because under the old system, if no candidate had reached 40% of the vote, then the top two candidates, there'd be a runoff. So right now, under the old system, you'd have a runoff between Maya Wiley and Eric Adams, because Maya Wiley was second in first choice votes and Eric Adams was first in first choice votes. So under the old system, you'd have a runoff election just days from now. I think it was 2-3 weeks after. And that would be kind of interesting to see. But of course, we don't have that now, and we're supposed to save money because we don't have to have that runoff election. But with all the chaos that's ensued and the potential of a hand recount, it's going to get very interesting.
Yeah, sounds like it's going to be a real mess. I mean, I guess I hadn't thought through the implications of a hand recount with the RCV. So it's not just by hand the retabulating what it says on the piece of paper, but it's the actual like reallocation that's done by hand. So they're literally physically moving from receptacle to receptacle these hundreds of thousands, nearly 1 million pieces of paper.
Right, and that is actually what happened in these city council races earlier this year. There are pictures from the Board of Elections.
That's 1% of the size of the citywide race, right?
Right, very small. And those were special elections, and very few people showed up. But even those with just tens of thousands of ballots took weeks. And imagine having these tremendous buckets. I mean, you'd really need dumpsters or large trash cans in order to get this done. And imagine Maya Wiley, she would have, somewhat of a decent argument if it came down to such a small margin in that penultimate elimination round. But you can imagine, let's say with my elimination, I think I was eliminated in round, I don't know, 4 or something of the latest simulation. And what if the margin of my elimination was less than 0.5%? Could I then go argue in court that, wow, we need to have a hand recount because maybe I shouldn't have been eliminated, and that would change the course of history of the remaining rounds, because of what were my 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s would be very different from, say, whoever else was the other person who was eliminated, their 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, and that can change the course of all of the remaining rounds. So that's the world we live in at this point. I'm hoping I'm explaining this as clearly as possible to your viewers, because there are a lot of complications involved.
For sure. Yeah, it's an incredibly Byzantine process that I think our viewers probably certainly understand better now than they did an hour ago. But I'm willing to wager they understand at least as well as the folks at the BOE that can't seem to figure out how to count the votes or how to assess what they've done wrong when they fail to count the votes. So I'm hoping that they'll start taking this a little more seriously. It's a famously and notoriously and unanimously agreed to be a horribly unserious organization, given its hugely serious, sacrosanct duty in the largest city in the country to administer.
Flip, if I may, one point,
fairly measure the election process. Yes, go ahead.
One point in terms of timing, just so you and your viewers know, with any of these lawsuits, a judge signs a piece of paper called an order to show cause, which basically schedules a court hearing. I believe in the Eric Adams litigation, the judge has selected a court hearing for July 22nd. And I would expect that to be a procedural hearing where just whoever the interested parties are at that point show up and make and interpose their arguments. And that would sort of kick off any litigation that would then happen from here on out. And I can tell you, since I'm an election attorney, I'm involved in some of these other suits. I'm aware of 2 other lawsuits where courts have also set that July 22nd date for a procedural hearing. Now, in some of those, and I think courts have chosen that July 22nd date because they kind of figure that over the next week, 2-3 weeks, you have absentee ballots coming in, absentee ballot cures, tabulations, and then by July 22nd, the dust will have settled, and then litigation ensues, and then we'll figure out what's happening. Now, in some of these races, let's say some of these city council races, maybe the margin will be big enough where the parties will lay down their arms, and then sort of people show up on July 22nd. And it's like, well, we don't really have anything else to say, Your Honor, aside from the results you've gotten from the Board of Elections. And then those cases sort of become moot. And then in other situations, and probably we'll see this in the mayoral race, where it'll either be close in the final round or in one of the preceding rounds, whether the penultimate round or otherwise. Then we have litigation. One thing about the Maya Wiley case, she could have just filed a boilerplate lawsuit today, but instead her lawyers spent extra time sort of writing out the whole argument about being entitled to a hand recount. And she didn't really have to go into all that detail just to reserve her rights today. So that was a shot across the bow from what I see as sort of coming down the pike here.
Right. One other comment I'll make, and this is another editorial cynical comment, but I don't think it's an inaccurate one, is that the board also is notoriously and it's supposedly bipartisan. They have equal number of Republicans and Democrats, but it doesn't do anything to make them independent. It just makes them be more machine beholden to whichever machine, the Democratic or the Republican, is the one in question. In this case, it's the Democratic machine, obviously. And Adams as the machine candidate, one can expect the board to have a pro-Adams preference and legal strategy. So the board and I've been involved in more than I care to recall election and pre-election and post-election litigation battles in New York State. And the board is not independent. I mean, they're always a named party, but they typically are arguing vociferously in one direction or another, and it's ostensibly to preserve the integrity of the election, whatever else it be. But you can expect, were it to come down to a non-Adams candidate having valid grounds to overturn an otherwise apparent Adams victory, that they could suddenly become an actual player in the litigation, and therefore, a moving piece in the remaining uncertainty about who winds up winning. So we're obviously a few rounds from that actually coming into play, but something to sort of keep in mind as we evaluate, who are the actual agents and who are the impartial arbiters here. And the board, hapless as it is extremely well funded, does have well-paid lawyers, and will have a preference in how this all shakes out. With that in mind, it is now 3:00. I think this is one of our longest, if not our longest episode. I won't hold you guys too much longer, but any parting thoughts, AE News, in terms of how you would advise traders, either who are currently in this market, thinking about getting in this market, or the related markets? We know that your overall thesis here is that Adams is still a buy in the mid to high 60s, but any parting thoughts for folks to think about?
Yeah, going back to absentees, another important thing to consider is that Adams won the first round 31% to Garcia's 19%. So, of course, more assembly districts would be from Adam favoring areas if you're only considering the first round. So you should consider how those would tighten up with second, third, fourth, and fifth choice votes. And also another reason why campaigns especially, were so confident in Adams winning was because they looked mainly at first choice preferences and not so much at second, third, fourth, and fifth choice. So that same logical downfall could be propping up Adams at the moment as well.
That's an interesting point, if I may say so, because Adams has been skeptical of ranked choice voting, and there were some Adams sort of endorsers who did come out and sort of express their skepticism of ranked choice voting. And so, yes, that is true that there were some Adams voters, probably more than many other candidates, who would have just filled in the Eric Adams bubble under first choice and then walked out of the voting booth. And then, of course, sort of metaphorically, they're doing that at home in their absentee ballot. So that is something to consider. But on the other hand, then there would be a lot of Adams voters who might have just in their absentee ballot filled in Adams as one and left the rest blank. So you got to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts to keep straight here. And I want to thank both of you for so much of your time today and helping us straighten it all out. You're able to see the Twitter handles of these fine gentlemen on screen, so be sure to give them a follow. Aaron, good luck in the rest of the race, your ensuing litigation, and AE, good luck on your trading on this. Thank you again both for joining us. Thank you, viewers at home, for watching. We'll be back, I'm sure, with more on this topic early next week. Might be Monday, might be Tuesday. Either way, it'll be at 2 p.m. live. So make sure you're subscribed. Hit that little bell notification icon, and you will be notified when we do go live. Again, follow us on Twitter at Old Bull TV. Our DMs are open, so feel free to reach out and say hello. And I think that about does it. Everyone have a great weekend and happy trading. We'll see you next time.